Hello Change Program people. So we are down to the very last plan of my 4-plan program, which is nutritional plan for metabolic flexibility. Don't worry if you can't read this, this is actually more for my purposes than yours. And with this, the key component is definitely the ketogenic diet. The last one I did was, the base component there was fasted training. One thing I did kind of miss out on that, because one of the things I draw upon is around about sort of the survival of the fittest, how we've come to survive in this form. And thinking about fasted training, it's like there was definitely no fridges in Paleolithic man. You know, we didn't really store food, so we'd get up from a night of sleeping fasted, and then, you know, generally might have to climb some trees in order to get some food, or just to see where the nearest water supply was, or just generally have to get some work done in order to get some food in us. So I think that's where fasted training works in terms of that hypothesis of you know, how we've survived. So breaking down nutritional plan for metabolic flexibility, breaking it down in as simpler terms as I can, the ketogenic diet. And what I would say, why it is number 4 of 4, because whereas the others is about, let's just talk about weight loss, it's about getting access to fat in the easiest way possible. This one, I put the word revolutionary because it's actually about recreating our energy system and making fats our primary energy source. So that is revolutionary, that's very different, and that does take a high degree of manipulation of the body. So whereas the other one, you might look at it as an evolutionary, not in terms of biology, but just evolutionary bit by bit, getting there. This is a more radical, more revolutionary process. In terms of sort of looking at how we've arrived where we are, one thing I would say about that is, when you start getting into diets, it's very difficult to say this is how we ate then, because basically we ate what was there, and it depends on latitude, what era we're talking about, very, very different. One thing you can definitely say is we were definitely, I think the best meta study I looked at, it said like 9 out of 10 Paleolithic humans were definitely low carb, you could say. And it wasn't rare maybe to be ketogenic, but I wouldn't like to say we live like that, no, because our history is very varied in terms of diet. It depends, you know, was it a tropical climate? And so there's not really a good way of getting into that to say this is how we ate then, because it depends when, where, we just ate what we had to eat to survive. But in terms of like fasting and how that works, I think that is true, that we didn't store food, obviously. So that's a fair assumption, but I digress. What I want to talk about with keto, actually I do want to start with fasting and explain how it came about in terms of keto, because fasting has, even in modern history, has an old and an ancient background, 2,000 years back to the Greeks. I think Hippocrates' only written treatment for epilepsy was fasting, and fasting was a known cure for lots of things. But obviously it comes with a downside, which is if you want to prolong it, you're going to starve. So a way of, and this is why we call it the fasting compromise, a way of prolonging fasting without depriving yourself of nutrients or the calories to survive is keto. Because what you're doing there, you're still acting on the body's energy system in terms of starving its glucose source, but you're still giving it, in terms of fats and moderate protein, you're still giving it good nutrients and good energy source for its survival. So you can prolong that fasted approach. So it's like the cousin of fasting. So let's break down what it is. I kind of touched on it there. It's basically, it's a way of starving the body of its usual in these days energy source, glucose, by starving it of the glucose, so it then has to loot the body for other energy sources. Main one then is going to be ketones, hence the name, the ketogenic diet, which is basically, the way to think about it in terms of simple terms, is fat. And that should start the brain thinking why it is such a promising way to go if we think about weight loss, particularly fat burning. How we break it down in terms of practically, I've got these bands here that might be helpful. So consumption, if we're talking about just a general ketogenic diet, the bands I look at is between 60 and 80% consumption from fats, which sounds a bit scary and crazy. Now, if we're talking about therapeutic keto, which is how they cure illnesses and things like epilepsy and stuff, that's more 90% and up. But just a general keto diet, you can tend to between 60 and 80% consumption of your diet is fats, between 15 and 30% is protein, between 0 and 10% is carbs. And you'll see that's quite a wide band. And the reason I've made it wide is because, and this is something that's important, everybody's got their own agenda. I myself have got my own preferences. But the truth about nutrition in general is, just because, for example, our gut biome is so varied, you know, there's trillions of bacterial cells, there's hundreds of thousands of strains of bacteria, and we're all going to respond differently from different types of diet. I think it's fair to say we'll generally all respond better from lessening our carbohydrate intake in terms of what the modern diet's like. But there is lots of variability in terms of humans, and there's lots of good studies about trying to find out your glucose response from different foods. It varies differently. So some people will need less than 5% of carbs restriction in order to get into ketosis. Some can go up to 15%. We all respond differently. We're all diverse. We're all different. And a lot of the journey of health is about learning what you respond well to. But if we were to break that down into your general 2,000 calorie a day, for example, that'd be 167% from fats, 100 grams of consumption from protein, 25 grams from carbs. Now, fats again sounds a bit scary, but for example, oily fish is a high percentage of fat. So lots of animal intake has got a high percentage of fats. So it's not as wild as it sounds, and you obviously want to be very careful about what those fats are. You want good quality, healthy fats. But yeah, if we're looking at health, just continue that theme, one thing we can definitely say is ketosis is very good for inflammation. And inflammation, I've started here, is pretty much one of the best, maybe the best biomarker for general health, because it's an immune response to where there's an issue, the body will send inflammation to heal it. So if we're inflamed a lot, that's not good, or it's telling us something. And it's definitely good with inflammation. There is some unknowns about why. A lot of the new studies say that there's an ability through the ketones to be able to talk to the genes that control inflammation. But yeah, it's a little bit not totally known, but it's definitely good for inflammation, which is links to things like stiffening of the arteries, heart health, lots of areas around, you know, heart. Lots of good things come from having a lower inflammation, obviously. Anything around sort of circulatory blood sugar levels is definitely benefits from ketogenic diet. But it makes us much more insulin sensitive, so we don't need to pump loads of insulin to get that permeable effect, to get that absorptive effect, which is making those cells like a wall. We make those cells like the cell of a bubble, the wall of a bubble, very easy to absorb. Our absorption is much better. We don't need to produce loads and overwork our pancreas to produce loads of insulin. We're much more insulin sensitive. We much more less up and down blood sugar spikes, which links to our appetite, which links to lots of other health helps. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, all those sort of circulatory health benefits come from them. There's a lot of, or some good research around mental energy. There's a good book called The Talent Code, Daniel Coyle. He talks about the myelin and how that connectivity in the brain. It's a long, big book. I won't try and summarise it here, but there is some evidence about the myelin sheath saturated fat is good for the brain, certainly. Definitely for seizures, epilepsy, and other sort of seizure-based illnesses, therapeutically does help. There's some evidence around ADHD in children, helps them calm, things like that. Good for fertility, and because lots of cancers need sugar to thrive, it's often good for helping to keep a control on certain cancers. People who need to be careful with the ketogenic diet, type 1 diabetes, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you've got to be a little bit careful. But what probably you want to know about is what it is definitely good for, and this is going back to the sort of biology of it, it's definitely good for fat burning. So what I would suggest is, if you've got lots and lots of weight to lose, you want to try something, it's good for weight loss and fat burning for sure. That's one area I would say to you that it is very good for, because What it does get the body to burn fat. Now we're talking initially, that's why the consumption of fat is so high. We're initially talking about dietary fat, but eventually once the adaptations happened, we can learn to use our own body fat as an energy source to burn. So you can burn through a lot of fat if you are very scientific about it, and you manipulate the body in certain ways, and you take certain approaches. You can imagine just how good that can be for a fat burning, leaning you out scenario. The reason I promote it for some, it's obviously what I think it is good about is it does take a lot to get to ketosis. So ketosis is the state where the body is actually burning ketones as opposed to glucose. And it goes through various adaptations. There's a 3-day point, there's a couple of week point, and then ultimately you get what I would say is the best thing to think about is it's an 8 to 10 week adaptation process in full, because the body does have to learn how to get to that stage. The mitochondria, the things that create energy in the body, they need to learn that process. So that's why you have things called the keto flu, because it's stuttering. It doesn't know yet how to do it. It has to learn, so it can mess you up a little bit, and you have to be very strategic about how you get into ketosis. But generally adaptation, again, it varies, but for most people, you're talking about an 8 to 10 week window. So you've got to bear with it. And the reason I would say, one of the benefits of bearing with it is, a lot of the evidence shows that once the body's learned it, once the mitochondria learn how to use fats for fuels, ketones, it retains that knowledge. So then, and that's where the term metabolic flexibility comes in, then, not everybody wants to live their life on that quite restrictive diet, but you can cycle in and out of it. Maybe you'll do 2 months a year. Maybe you will do 5 days on and 2 days off. Because you've retained that knowledge, you don't need to go through those adaptation processes generally again. Fasting will kick you back into it quickly as well. So that's a good positive. If you need to kick back into something, teach the mitochondria how to do it, it will retain that knowledge generally. Hence metabolic flexibility. A couple of quick things to give you some, not concerns, but the obvious ones is around hydration and mineral levels, because your carbs do carry a lot of water, and they also carry good things like sodium and stuff. So you've got to make sure you're hydrated. You want to make sure you're drinking lots of water. Maybe I use herbal teas, for example, or green teas and things like that, just because I'm not that good at drinking water, but that's a way of making sure you keep hydrated, and salt your water with good quality Himalayan salts. But the main one is about adherence, about keeping to it, because it's binary. You're either in ketosis or you're not. You're either burning fat for fuels or you're not, so generally speaking. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're consuming loads of fat, but you're still consuming enough carbohydrates to make the body use glucose as energy, because then you're just A, eating lots more probably calories than you need to, and B, you could well be storing those calories because you might get those insulin spikes, and then you got the fat consumption. So you don't want to be doing it. You basically, I would say to you, do it if it's you decided to do it, but you've got to be on it. It takes discipline, and you got to keep with it. You've got to stay with it for a good 8 to 10 weeks before you're going to see. You will see some initial results because of the water drop, but you want to see the fat burning results, and that's going to come in time. So something to stick with, and I will do more on more practical stuff about how you would get into it, shopping, things like that. As we go. But yes, so that is Nutrition Plan 4. We've got 1 to 4, mix and match, do more than one, and that's the breakdown for keto. More to follow. Thank you.